Audio made possible by www.jackettome.com. Warning. The following has suggestive content that is not suitable for some listeners. Audio Fanfiction Productions presents Wide Awake. Fanfiction written by Angskata003. Fanfiction inspired by the Twilight Saga written by Stephanie Meyer. Chapter 35. Valentine Pineapple Pears. Bella's point of view. I reached my hand down to my knee and scratched it in contempt while Alice whirled a large lock of my hair around the curling iron and chattered at Rose, who was flipping through a magazine on her bed. I was fairly positive she had been planning to put me in this outfit for as long as she had been planning her special night with Jasper. She actually pulled out the leather pants the day prior just to make me spend my veto. That should have been a big red flashing sign. That and the fact that February 14th fell on a Sunday this year. She seemed oddly relieved hours earlier when I informed her that Edward and I didn't have any plans for the night. That was a complete lie, of course. I had already made a fairly extensive menu in lieu of an actual gift, considering the reaction my last attempt at gift-giving received. Sadly, my lack of plans with Edward gave her the green light for this outfit. The shirt was a dark, scarlet thread, with a square neckline that was so on my chest that the top of the ridiculously lacy red push-up bra/Chinese torture device she forced me into would peek out if I even moved the wrong way. And then there was always the red tiered knee-length skirt. I was fairly convinced that Satan himself constructed it out of the HES gauzy material unsuitable to be worn with leggings. In reality, it was better than the one she had originally intended for me to wear. She had held up a horrifically pink miniskirt enthusiastically before I promptly refused it. She pouted until I explained the logic behind my refusal with a grimace. Her pout turned into a frown and an apologetic glance as she realized that the miniskirt would expose one of my larger scars. I was hoping the whole awkward experience would save me from having to wear a skirt at all. I was sorely mistaken. I had to watch her and Rose gush and coo about how adorable I looked as they made me do a little grudging twirl in the middle of Elise's room. Adorable. It was a new low. I began feeling more and more like one of those poor dogs you see in public. The ones wearing fluffy pink tutus and miserable expressions as their owners paraded them around with a grin. I shifted my bare legs uncomfortably while I grimaced at my cleavage in the vanity mirror and sent Elise's reflection a pointed glare. Valentine's Day was officially my least favorite holiday. And as soon as she walked out the door at 6, I was returning to civilian clothing. My hoodie had never seemed so inviting. Admittedly, however, I was quite enjoying an afternoon with the girls, feeling normal with someone other than just Edward for a change. It was rather refreshing to hear them gossip and talk about usual girl stuff like I was one of them. Alice wrapped another lock of my hair around the curling iron. So when I finally got the manager on the phone, I insulted her low inventory and brainless employees. She grinned while glancing over her shoulder at Rose, who was still flipping through the magazine on the bed. Needless to say, I got the Princess Leia costume 2 days early and $30 cheaper. She snickered softly while moving on to another strand. Rose and I both cringed simultaneously at her mention of the costume she was wearing for Jasper. It was very particular to a fantasy of his, and she had spent hours online ordering and perfecting every detail to surprise him with. I could never watch Return of the Jedi again. Rose sighed and flipped a page of the magazine while she lounged against the headboard of the bed. "You're too extravagant," and was perfectly content with 10 minutes on my knees. She smirked at the magazine page. Alice rolled her eyes at Rose's reflection before furrowing her brows at a lock of my hair that wasn't curling to her liking. "Not all of us can be so profoundly talented at the art of fellatio, Rose," she mumbled distractedly while shaking her head and redoing the lock of hair. Rose scoffed. "If I were so talented it would only take 5 minutes." She quirked an eyebrow, finally looking up from the book to see Alice. They both snickered while Alice pulled another lock of my hair, and shook her head with a grin. Rose met my gaze in the reflection of the mirror.
"Take notes, Mary Sue."
She winked suggestively with a twinkle in her bright blue eyes. I blushed a bit as I quickly shifted my attention to my lap. I would never understand how they could be so casual about discussing those kinds of things. I couldn't even talk about kissing a word without turning the shade of my skirt. Alice chuckled softly from behind me while freeing another curl from the hot iron.
"She'd only need them if she did that kind of stuff,"
she mumbled while she pursed her lips, and furrowed her brows at another stubborn lock of my hair. I glanced up at her reflection in the mirror, slightly offended. "How do you know I don't?" I asked, slightly resentful of her condescending tone. She snapped her head up from my hair, to meet my gaze in the reflection of the mirror.
"I thought you and Edward weren't having sex,"
she asked with wide eyes. I bit back a grimace and shifted my gaze back to my lap. "It's not the same thing," I muttered while picking at the red material of my skirt. Alice coughed and freed the lock of hair.
"Semantics, Bella. The only reason to put a dick in your mouth is because you want it somewhere else,"
she said a bit harshly while roughly tugging another lock of my hair into the curling iron. I heard Rose snickering from the bed as I looked up to meet Elisa's gaze once again. "So what if I do?" I snapped at her. It wasn't any of her business, but I was tired of being treated like a child. Alice pulled the lock of hair from the curling iron, and narrowed her eyes at me.
"Trust me, you don't,"
she replied curtly, looking far angrier over the topic than absolutely necessary for any third party to be. I gaped at her. "Are you expecting me to be a virgin forever?" I asked incredulously, utterly confused at her reaction. Alice glowered at the lock of hair in the iron without meeting my gaze.
"When it's that word color you want to do it with, yes,"
she answered sharply, while Rose continued flipping through the magazine indifferently. I was appalled as I continued staring at her slack-jawed. "Tell me I'm not getting an abstinence lecture from Princess Labia," I blurted in disbelief, earning a hearty snicker from the bed where Rose sat. Alice yanked my hair out of the curling iron, and put her hand on her hip.
"Jasper and I are different."
She raised her eyebrows at me in the reflection of the mirror. "How do you figure?" I scoffed as her ridiculous double standard flared my annoyance. She rolled her eyes, picking another lock of hair from my head, and twirling it around the curling iron.
"For one, Jasper isn't a complete dickhead."
She fingered the lock angrily while Rose snorted in disagreement from the bed. I sighed as my face fell and my shoulders slumped. "I thought you and Edward were getting along," I said in a sad voice. I was really getting attached to the idea of them being somewhat friendly. Alice shook her head as she freed another girl.
"Just because he has decent taste in music doesn't mean I'm willing to sit back and watch him ruin my cousin."
She spoke through clenched teeth, as she picked up another piece of hair and began twirling it around the iron. I shook my head despite the constraints of the curling iron. "You're so wrong, Alice," I whispered, trying desperately to push back the anger building inside of me. I watched as she dropped the lock of hair, and her face fell from the angry expression to one of concern. "Okay," Alice sighed, depositing the curling iron, and standing beside me with her hands on her hips.
"Tell me this,"
she continued with a serious expression.